Life has a cruel way of testing you, pushing you to the edge just to see if you'll break. I've lived through those moments. The nights I went to bed hungry, the days I walked miles because I couldn't afford the bus fare, the years I spent feeling like a failure. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that street corner the day my past came rushing back to haunt me. My name is Adrian Carter. If you saw me now, you'd see a man in a tailored suit, stepping out of a luxury car, walking into high-rise boardrooms, shaking hands with powerful people. But I wasn't always this man. 10 years ago, I was broke, desperate, and drowning in the weight of my own failures. I grew up in a small town where dreams rarely took flight. My parents worked hard, but we barely scraped by. College was supposed to be my ticket out, but that dream crumbled fast. I dropped out when I couldn't afford tuition, leaving me with nothing but a pile of debt and a long list of regrets. I took whatever jobs I could: bartender, warehouse worker, fast food cashier. Each paycheck disappeared as soon as it hit my account. I remember the humiliation of counting coins to buy groceries, the exhaustion of working double shifts just to afford rent. And through it all, there was Rachel. Rachel wasn't just my girlfriend, she was my lifeline. She saw something in me, even when I saw nothing in myself. She would stay up late, listening to me talk about my dreams of building a business, of making something out of nothing. She believed in me so fiercely that for a while I almost believed in myself. But love doesn't pay the bills. The stress of barely surviving, of knowing I had nothing to offer her, ate away at me. Every time I saw her working extra hours just to help cover our expenses, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I started pushing her away, telling myself it was for her own good. She deserved more than a man who couldn't even take care of himself. The night she packed her bags, I didn't stop her. I wanted to beg her to stay, but I let my pride win. And when she walked out that door, she took the last piece of my heart with her. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never be that helpless again. I would build something so big, so powerful, that I would never have to watch someone I love suffer because of me. I worked like a madman. I studied business, finance, and marketing every chance I got. I watched free courses online, read every book I could get my hands on, and studied the lives of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. Then I met David Kensington. A retired entrepreneur, David was the kind of man who could spot hunger in a person's eyes. He saw mine. He took me under his wing, teaching me everything about investments, strategic risks, and the mindset of the ultra-successful. At 25, I took my first leap. I started an online retail business with every dollar I had. It was brutal. I worked 20-hour days, skipped meals, and fought through every rejection. Investors laughed me out of meetings. I slept in my office because I couldn't afford an apartment. But I refused to give up. And then, everything changed. One viral marketing campaign. That was all it took. Orders exploded overnight. My business went from a struggling startup to a multi-million-dollar brand in less than a year. Investors who once ignored me now lined up to be part of my success. By the time I turned 30, I had everything: money, power, influence. I had built an empire from nothing. But for all my success, there was one thing I didn't have: Rachel. I told myself it was too late, that our chapter was closed. I buried myself in work, convinced that the past was just that, the past, until the day I saw her again. Collapsing on the sidewalk, pregnant, alone. And in that moment, the years between us vanished. The success, the money, the carefully built life, it all meant nothing. Because Rachel was in trouble. And no matter what had happened between us, I wasn't going to walk away this time. The city was alive with its usual chaos. Honking cars, hurried footsteps, the chatter of strangers. I had just finished a business meeting and was walking toward my car when something unusual caught my attention. A small crowd had gathered near the sidewalk. People murmured in concern, their eyes fixed on someone who had collapsed on the pavement. At first, I didn't think much of it. New York was always full of stories. Someone fainting from exhaustion, a random street drama, an everyday occurrence. But then, my eyes landed on her, and the world stopped. Rachel. She was curled on the ground, clutching her swollen belly, her face twisted in pain. Her long brown hair, the same hair I used to run my fingers through, was matted to her forehead. She was gasping, struggling to stay conscious, but it was clear she was in trouble. I didn't think. I just moved. Pushing through the onlookers, I knelt beside her, my heart pounding. "Rachel!" My voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment, she looked dazed, unsure if she was dreaming. Then, recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by something I couldn't quite place. Shock, pain, maybe even fear. "Adrian," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "It's me. You're going to be okay. Just hold on." Her body trembled as she tried to sit up, but she was too weak. I saw the sweat beading on her forehead, the paleness of her skin. This wasn't just exhaustion. Something was seriously wrong. Without hesitation, I scooped her into my arms. "I'm taking you to the hospital," I said, more to myself than to her. She didn't resist. Maybe she was too weak, or maybe she trusted me, even after all these years. Either way, I wasn't going to waste another second. I carried her to my car, ignoring the stares and whispers of the people around us. Once inside, I drove like a man possessed, weaving through traffic, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I kept glancing at Rachel. Her breathing was shallow, her hands cradling her belly protectively. "How far along are you?" I asked, my voice softer this time. 7 months, she murmured, barely audible. 7 months. A strange sensation gripped my chest, a mix of emotions I couldn't even name. Questions burned in my mind, but now wasn't the time. Right now, I needed to get her to safety. When we reached the hospital, I barely waited for the car to stop before jumping out. "I need help!" I shouted as I carried her inside. Doctors and nurses rushed forward, and within seconds, Rachel was wheeled away on a stretcher. And just like that, she was gone. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering. What had happened to her? Where was the father of her child? And why, after all these years, did it still feel like she was mine? I paced the waiting room, my mind spinning with possibilities. My life had been built on logic, on calculated risks and careful planning. But nothing about this moment made sense. Minutes stretched into an hour, then another. Finally, a doctor approached me. "She's stable," he said. But it was close. Severe dehydration and stress caused complications. If she had collapsed anywhere else, she might not have made it in time. I exhaled, relief flooding through me. "She's asking for you," the doctor added. My breath caught. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her, to hear whatever truth was waiting behind that hospital door. But I had run away from Rachel once before. I wouldn't do it again. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside her hospital room. She was awake, looking exhausted but stable. When she saw me, something unreadable flickered in her eyes. "You stayed," she said softly. "Of course I stayed," I replied, taking a seat beside her. "Rachel, what happened to you?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening over the hospital blanket. "It's a long story," I leaned forward. "Then start from the beginning." She sighed, looking away for a moment. Then finally she spoke. "There is no husband, Adrian." Her words hit me like a freight train. No husband, which meant... Before I could ask, she turned her gaze back to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "The baby is yours." For a moment, the world around me faded. The sound of the beeping machines, the murmurs of nurses in the hallway, even the rise and fall of my own breath. All of it disappeared into the background. I stared at Rachel, my mind struggling to process what she had just said. "The baby is mine?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, almost as if I was afraid that saying it too loud would make it real. Rachel nodded, her tired eyes watching me carefully. "Yes, Adrian, he's yours." My hands clenched into fists. A million emotions crashed over me. Shock, confusion, anger, and something else. Something terrifying. I had spent years building my empire, making sure I would never feel powerless again. But in this moment, I had never felt more unprepared. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Rachel flinched, but she didn't look away. Because you were gone! I opened my mouth, ready to argue, but she held up a weak hand to stop me. I found out I was pregnant a few months after we broke up. I wanted to tell you, Adrian. I really did. But when I finally got the courage to reach out, you had already moved on. Moved on. I frowned, trying to remember where I had been 7 months ago. That was around the time my business had exploded. My face was everywhere. Magazines, news outlets, social media. I saw you in an interview, Rachel continued. You were talking about your company, your success, how nothing from your past mattered anymore. You were living the life you had always dreamed of. I convinced myself that you were better off without this. She gestured toward her belly. I shook my head in disbelief. Rachel, you should have told me. No matter what, I had a right to know. She let out a bitter laugh. Would it have changed anything? Would you have dropped everything? The business, the investors, the millions to come back to me? Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because I didn't have an answer. Would I have? Back then, I had been so focused on proving myself that I hadn't looked back. I had convinced myself that success would erase the past. But sitting here, seeing Rachel alone, exhausted, and carrying my child, proved that some things never really disappear. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. Rachel, why were you out there alone? Where have you been? She hesitated, then sighed. I lost my job a few months ago. I had some savings, but with the pregnancy, they ran out fast. I couldn't keep up with rent, and my landlord kicked me out last week. I was trying to get to a shelter when everything went black. My stomach twisted. Rachel, the woman I had once loved more than anything, had been out there struggling, alone and pregnant with my child, while I had been sitting in luxury, completely unaware. I felt sick. I reached for her hand instinctively, and to my surprise, she didn't pull away. You should have never gone through that alone, I murmured. She let out a shaky breath. Well, I did. Not anymore. I squeezed her hand gently. Rachel, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. I don't care what happened in the past. I'm here now. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Adrian, I don't need your pity. This isn't pity, I cut in firmly. This is responsibility. This is something bigger than both of us. I glanced at her belly, at the life growing inside her. My child. The realization settled deep in my chest. This wasn't just about Rachel and me anymore. This was about the future, about making things right. I won't let you do this alone, I promised, no matter what it takes. Rachel studied me for a long moment. Then, for the first time since I had found her on that street, she nodded. And just like that, everything changed. Rachel's nod was small, hesitant, but it carried the weight of everything left unsaid between us. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just about responsibility. It wasn't just about doing the right thing. This was about us, about the years we had lost, the love we had buried under pride and ambition, and now the life we had unknowingly created together. But promises were easy to make. Actions were what mattered. The next few days were a whirlwind. I refused to let Rachel spend another second struggling. So I moved her into a private suite in the hospital, ensuring she got the best care possible. When she was discharged, I took her to my penthouse. She resisted at first, but I wouldn't take no for an answer. I'm not a charity case, Adrian, she said, arms crossed as she stood in the massive living room that overlooked the city skyline. I met her gaze head on. I know that, but you're the mother of my child, and I take care of what's mine. A flicker of something, maybe pain, maybe something deeper, crossed her face. But she didn't argue further. The days turned into weeks. I made adjustments to my life in ways I never thought I would. Meetings were rescheduled around Rachel's doctor appointments. Business trips were canceled. The empire I had built no longer felt like the center of my world. We spent more time together, slowly breaking down the walls that had kept us apart. I learned about everything she had gone through, her struggles, her loneliness, her fear of bringing a child into the world without support. And in return, I told her about the years I had spent trying to chase success, only to realize too late that I had been running from the wrong things. One night, as she sat on the couch, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly, I found myself staring at her, overwhelmed by everything she had become. She looked up and caught me watching. "What?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. I hesitated, then said, "I never stopped loving you, Rachel." Her breath hitched. For a moment, she looked like she didn't believe me. Then, slowly, she reached for my hand and placed it over her stomach. A tiny movement, subtle but unmistakable. Our baby. I looked up at her, my chest tightening. "You feel that?" she whispered. I nodded. "This baby is proof that no matter how far we ran from each other, life had other plans," she said softly. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to blink them away. Instead, I tightened my grip on her hand. "I don't want to run anymore," I admitted. "I want us to be a family, Rachel. Not just for the baby, for us." She exhaled shakily, searching my face for something. Maybe truth, maybe hope. And then, finally, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's try." In that moment, the world I had spent years building, filled with wealth, power, and ambition, meant nothing compared to what I held in my arms. Rachel, our baby, our future. Because success wasn't about money or power, it was about love. And this time, I wasn't going to lose it again.